This man ends up being really important. His name is Edward Robinson. He's an American. He's an excellent Hebrew scholar. He knows his Bible very well. He knows Hebrew very well. And there's a big fight in the United States at the time about how the Bible should be interpreted. The liberals say it should be interpreted as stories. Not every single thing in the Bible is a fact, is accurate. It's a story. It's an important story, but it's not a historical document. Then there's a conservative school. He belongs to the conservative school. They say, no, every single thing in the Bible is a fact. And he goes to Palestine to prove the Bible happened. And he wants to prove it scientifically. And what he does is he travels the area and he asks the Arabs living here what the place name of this place is. And he writes it down. And he goes with a missionary who knows Arabic. So that's his helper. He writes it down and he hears echoes of Hebrew. So he's like, oh, this must have been the ancient land of whatever, you know. And he comes up with a really important work where you have the place names of the Bible in modern Palestine, which he got from people who lived there, the Arabs, or to become the Palestinians. And so from his list of place names, now cartographers can come with the Bible in their hand as a field guide and start mapping it. Yeah? I don't know why this one's here. Sorry, it should be here. He has this guy, Edward Robinson. He has a set of memoirs. They're really interesting to read. He actually says, the Bible says, this is the border of the Holy Land, of the Promised Land, was Dan to Beersheba. And he actually walks it. And he's like, okay, this is the border of Dan to Beersheba. And it's interesting, too, to see how he treats the Arabs that live there. He treats them as if they were biblical props, actors in his biblical stories. Because he'll say something like this. And from here Elijah wandered out into the southern desert and sat under a shrub of retem, just as our Arabs sat down under it every day and night. So everything that people were doing, the Arabs were doing when he was there, they were doing the exact same thing that was happening thousands of years ago. This is their importance for him. They're not people that he sees as equals, living in an equal time. They're just props. They're objects in the story. Once Edward Robinson creates his place name list, cartography becomes much more systematic. And in London, the Palestine Exploration Fund is founded. Between the time Edward Robinson comes to Palestine in the 1830s to when the fund is founded in the 1860s, so like 3 decades, you have a lot of people coming and they're mapping the Dead Sea or they're mapping Jerusalem or the Galilee. But there isn't one organization that is collecting all of that, and the Palestine Exploration Fund wants to be that organization that collects all of that. Not only that, they want to be the ones that map the entirety of the Holy Land in one map. Before you just have like a map of Jerusalem or a map of the Dead Sea. He wants to, the Palestine Exploration Fund wants to have an entire map of the entire Holy Land or the Promised Land. And they say that they're a scientific outfit without any interest or any political interest, right? But in their inaugural speech, they say, in London, this is not to Palestinians, not even to Jews. This is to Protestants. In London, this country of Palestine belongs to you and to me. It is essentially ours, you know? We mean to walk through Palestine in the length and in the breadth of it because that land has been given to us. It's all about, it's ours, you know? We're going to map what is ours, you know? And they try to say that they're just scientific, but it's impossible to believe when you hear things like this. They weren't very they weren't very sophisticated about hiding their interests either. Not only that, they have they're a scientific organization, they're a religious organization, but they're also an imperial organization because the only people that can really help them map is the British War Office, the military. They're the only ones that have the capability of making really good maps. So they ask the British, can you help us with this project? And the way that they sell it to the British military is by something like this. The survey would be of great importance as a military map, should the Eastern question come forward and Palestine ever be the site of military operations. And the British military is like, yes, we need a map because Russia keeps making moves to the Ottoman Empire and might take their territories, and we need to defeat them. We need to prevent that from happening. So it was really convenient for the British military to have religion and science as a cover for them to come in here and map the area. So they come and they spend about 7 to 8 years mapping from the 1870 to 1877, and they come up with this. This is the first time that Palestine starts getting its borders. You can recognize it, so? Yeah. It doesn't have the Negev. I can tell you a little bit about where the Negev came from, but this is Dan up here.
Western Palestine?
And it's Western Palestine. That's an excellent question. Okay. That's an excellent. I love you guys. Okay, here's the story. These biblical explorers came using the Book of Joshua to map Palestine. The Book of Joshua is the 6th book in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible. It talks about after the Israelites flee Egypt, how they get the Promised Land. And it's a very difficult book to read because it's a very genocidal book. You know, God says, you must kill every man, woman, child, everybody. Don't leave anybody there or I will punish you. You have to kill everybody. It's really hard to read. It's an important book to know, though, because really conservative Zionists use that book today to say, God told us we need to kill the Canaanites, and the Palestinians to them are the Canaanites. Yeah. So, the book of Joshua, the first half is that genocidal military conquest, yeah? The second half is the very geographic book about the land that God gave the 12 tribes of Israel. And it's very descriptive. It has all of these places. And in that book, the Promised Land, it also goes east of the River Jordan. So really, technically, according to that book, the Promised Land is this plus more on the east of the River Jordan. The British mapped only Western Palestine. They did have plans to map east of the River Jordan, but the Americans wanted to map also. And so the Americans told the British, can you help us? I mean, can we help you? We want to be part of this project too. We want to map it too. And the British said, okay, how about you map east of the River Jordan? Knowing the Americans back then were not very good at cartography, as good as the British were, knowing that the more important sites were west, the important holy sites were west, and if the Americans messed it up, it was fine. At least they had the western part. And in fact, the Americans messed it up. They didn't get the eastern part mapped.
So it's like East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem.
Yeah, well, yeah, that division. It's like by accidents of history why, like, Palestine ends at the River Jordan. So this is why it's called the map of Western Palestine. And here is Dan up here, and here's Beersheba. Dan. The Negev comes into play later when the British in the 1880s occupied Egypt, and they're occupying Egypt because Suez Canal is there, and they want to protect the Suez Canal by having the Sinai Peninsula be a big buffer. So they just draw an arbitrary line from Gaza to Aqaba.
If the Americans were to map to the eastern side, they would have called it
Jordan.
Eastern Palestine?
They would have called it the map of Eastern Palestine, yeah. But all of it would have been Palestine, yeah. You have a question? So this is how you get the Negev. It was largely because the Sinai Peninsula needed to be a buffer for the Suez Canal for the British. And there was just, that's why it's a straight line. With a little jagged area. I don't know if you've seen it. So from that map, in 1923, when the British take over, they actually say the borders are going to be from Dan to Beersheba. They say this in 1919 at the Paris Peace Conference. After World War I, Britain, France, and the United States get together in Paris, and they're trying to create a new world so that there can never be another world war again. And they divide up the Ottoman territories, because now the Ottoman Empire has fallen. And you see the Prime Minister of Britain, Lloyd George, he says the borders of Palestine are from Dan to Beersheba, just like it says in, you know, these explorers' books. And so then this is how you get it. He invited the Zionists to come to that meeting and determine where the borders were going to be. And there was a big fight between them and the French, who had Syria, you know, Syria and Lebanon from Sykes-Picot. It kind of followed very much the Sykes-Picot map. Here you have a massive water basin, Mount Hermon's waters, and the Zionist movement wanted that. But the French were upset, and they were like, no, you're not going to have it. We already said it's the way Sykes-Picot was, you know. Eventually, the Israelis would get it in 1967 with the Golan Heights. I mean, this was in the plans, yeah? So, I mean, that's an example of how it's not really a religious claim that they're making fully. It's not just about the promised land, it's also about how you're going to create a viable state. And they say, well, we need all that water for our agriculture to have a viable state. This is what they're saying in 1919. And a very important note on that is that Lloyd George was a Zionist, a Christian Zionist, in the sense that he really believes that the Jews need to come back to the Holy Land so that the apocalypse can come. That kind of Zionist. So from that, I call it the Colonial Template, in that it was a map. It was boundaries created by the colonizer that was then fortified or made official in 1923. And this is the template then that Israelis used for their maps, and later Palestinians started to use for their maps. And it's not really something that's questioned anymore, like the history of the borders. Like early on in the Palestinian struggle, the borders, under Pan-Arabism, the borders were questioned. Like, these are arbitrary. The colonizers created these borders. But with Oslo and the acceptance of a state, the borders are accepted without questioning them.